Welcome everybody to our last and final class of Tikun Olam, Basic Gemara Tools. Excited to be here for our last class, although I will miss seeing you on Sunday evenings. And as usual, I promise we will have more classes after this. We don't have the next ones planned yet, but there will be more down the road. We will continue to build our Gemara toolbox and learn how to attack Sugiyot, how to punctuate, how to get through all the things that we've been discussing these last number of weeks. Okay, we're going to start again like last week. I'm going to do a little bit of a longer intro, and then I'm going to send you to Chavrutot for 45 minutes, and then we'll get back together again and go through the material. I'm going to share my screen and pull up these. Okay. Why is it doing this? No, I don't want that. Sorry. This. Something's not working. Okay, I'm going to try this one more time. Sorry about that. Okay, let's work from here. Okay, so lesson 4. Today we're going to learn. I thought I was going to do one thing. I decided to switch topics. We are not going to continue on with what we did last week, but we're going to talk about witnesses signing on a get. Now, you might think that's pretty basic. So what is a get? A get is a document of divorce. We started talking about divorce gitin last time, right? We're in Masechet Gitin, and our topic is a get. And we're going to now go through some of the psukim. We're going to start here. So the whole beginning part of today's shiur is going to be basically just introduction. I'm going to go through a bunch of the sources. We saw the source last time, I believe, which was the intro verse to getting divorced in the Torah, which is from Devarim, chapter 24, Pasuk Aleph, first pasuk in the chapter. Ki yikach ish isha ba'ala. So if a man takes a woman as a wife, that's a whole other topic. We're going to maybe get to that at some other point in the future. And if you're doing Daf Yomi, we'll get to it in Masechet Gitin. V'katavla sefer kritut v'natam biyadav v'sholcha mibeito. Today's class is going to be focused a lot on these words. V'katavla. He needs to write her a sefer kritut, which is a book that was going to separate between the two of them. Okay, it's clear that it's not done in the same way as marriage is done, right? We talked about this. The marriage is done in certain ways, but undoing the marriage cannot be done, for example, right, with money, like a ring, right, the way most of us get married. But there has to be, right, one of the ways you can get married is actually through a document. And likewise, you can only get out of the marriage through this document. It's called a sefer kritut. Kritut means it separates, and we're going to see this root come up a lot in today's daf. It's a book of separation. He gives it to her, and then he sends her out of the household. So now the main word we're going to talk about, as I said, is v'katavla. And you might think you have a document. What is a document? So a document generally needs signatures. Okay. So today we're going to see that there was this Tikun Olam about signatures. The problem is it's going to be a little bit trickier than that. And we'll have to see as we go on. So in the intro, we'll already see what exactly the tricky nature of this issue is. So the first Mishnah we're going to learn is a Mishnah in chapter 2, which is not our chapter. We've been learning everything in the 4th chapter. But we're going to go through this Mishnah first. It lays some background. And there's a very basic machloket in Gitin that we're going to talk about today that's going to kind of come up throughout our daf. Ein kotvim b'mechubar lakarka. You can't write a get on something that's attached to the ground. It has to be written. Right, nowadays, you write it on a piece of paper, right? You wouldn't write it on something attached to the ground, like a leaf or something like that. Can't be written on something attached to the ground. It has to be something detached from the ground, right? In those days, they didn't have paper like we have. So, maybe they took a leaf or something and they wrote on it. Okay, it's hard to imagine you would take a get and write on the leaf, but it can't be attached to the ground because it has to be ready to give to her. And that's not ready to give to her because it's attached. What if? So the Mishnah says on the one hand, ein kotvim mechubar lakarka. You can't write it on something attached to the ground. But then the Mishnah says, "Katavu b'mechubar." But if you did, talshu v'chatmu v'natznu la kasher. If you detached it and then signed the get. Okay, now there's a few different stages we're going to talk about. The first is there's something called the tofes. A tofes, if you know modern Hebrew, a tofes is a form. It's exactly what it is. It's a form. The form of the get is the basic stuff that's in every single get. The toref, we're going to talk about this in a minute, we're going to see it in the Gemara in a moment, is the part that is unique to this couple. It has his name, her name, all the specifics, where they come from. Those are the specifics. That's called the toref. And then after you write all this, then you have witnesses who sign the document. So this Mishnah tells you that even though the Torah had said v'katavla, as if the writing of the document was the most important, we now see that even though the writing is important, and you shouldn't write it on something if it's not ready to go. However, if you did, and then you detached it, and you signed it, and you gave it to her, that would actually be effective. Okay, right. Last week's shir was all about the giving to her, right? And if you didn't yet give it to her, you could actually cancel the get. That was after the get was already written and signed, presumably. So now the Gemara is going to start off. We're now going to the Gemara on that Mishnah. And the Gemara is going to say the following. There's a problem with this Mishnah. It starts off with katvu ala mechubar. But then it's right, meaning if you wrote it on the mechubar, remember it said, if you write it when it's attached, ein kotvim mechubar lakarka. But if you did, it still is valid as long as the signatures were done once it was detached. So the Gemara says, katvu ala mechubar v'ha'amar dresha ein kotvin. And on the one hand, it says it's okay to do. On the other hand, it says you can't do this. So how do we resolve it? Right? We kind of said, well, there's the ideal, and then there's the less than ideal. But now we're going to see what's the ideal, what's the less than ideal, and how does it work? And we're going to have two opinions here. Shocking, right? Our Gemara always has at least two opinions. There's going to be Rabba Bar Chana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and there's going to be Rish Lakish. There are actually more opinions here, but these are the ones I brought because this is the main thing I wanted to teach you. Okay, I was just talking about the toref and the tofes. The tofes being, remember, the basic part of the get without the unique details for that person. So what it means here is that when you wrote it, if katvu ala mechubar, but you wrote just the plain parts, the form part of the get, then you detached it, then you wrote the name of the couple and where they're from and all the details that are important and unique to them. If you did it that way, then it's effective. Okay, so let's read this again inside. Rabba Bar Chana says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Hu sheshiyer makom hatoref, as long as you leave over the toref. And this is Rabbi Elazar. This matches Rabbi Elazar's opinion. Damar ede mesira karte. This is going to be a very key phrase for today's shir. Ede mesira karte, and we're going to see Rabbi Meir says ede chatima karte. Karte coming from the kritut. I told you we'd see this verb, this word, this root over and over. Ede mesira karte means the important witnesses are the ones who witnessed the giving of the get to the woman. Okay? Those are the important witnesses. We're now going to learn that there's several sets of witnesses. There's witnesses that sign on the document, and there's witnesses that witness the woman receiving the get from the husband. Now, if you look if we go back to the psukim, right? Right? What does he do? So the way Rabbi Elazar reads this is, the writing of it is critical. What part of the writing is critical? We just said the writing of the toref, the part with her name and his name and the unique specifics. So that has to be done only once it's detached from the ground. If you wrote the tofes before, that's okay. And then, this whole thing, the get has to be written for him and for her. You can't have blank forms laying around, okay? You have to write from the beginning. But again, we're going to distinguish between the form part and the unique parts. And then because that's the main activity happening, right? Passing over the get to the woman. So that is the main thing that makes the get a get, right? Because it's the passing over, which is very much like at a wedding. We have Edei Kiddushin, right? They witness the act of Kiddushin, right? There's always two people who stand under the chuppah and they watch, right? This is very famous. Why? Because if the Eidim weren't kosher, right? Let's say they weren't good Eidim, right? I don't know if you've heard this, but sometimes there's ways to annul marriages by checking that maybe the witnesses were never really kosher witnesses. And then you can actually undo a marriage. It's a solution that's used in unique circumstances where there's really an important need for whatever reason, right? Let's say a woman is a Misurevet get and the husband's unwilling to give her a get. And then it turns out that the witnesses weren't kosher witnesses. Turns out they weren't even married. Now that sounds crazy because when you think of witnesses, what's the purpose of a witness? Purpose of a witness is to be able to say, I saw something happen, right? Normally we say witnesses are, in Hebrew, we would say liberol hadavar, right? They basically tell us what happened. Now, when it comes to a wedding, for example, the witnesses aren't there to tell you only what happened so that years later we could come and say, oh, I know that person was married. Those witnesses, because what I just described to you is that if the witnesses aren't good witnesses, or they didn't really witness, let's say someone got married without witnesses, they're actually not married. The eidim, their function, and this is going to be a big question about our eidim today, the eidim, their function as a dut, what we call the kiyum hadavar. It's witnesses that make the action an action. Without those witnesses, it's not a marriage. Okay, I'm interchanging marriage and betrothal. I'm really talking about betrothal, which is engagement, but halachic engagement. But that the kiddushin, which is done with edei kiddushin, the witness, this action, that has to be done. That's those eidim basically make. Without those witnesses, the action is not. It's as if there was no action, and that's what Rabbi Elazar says about the get. It's eidim asira. You need the witnesses that watch the whole get be transferred to the woman. And then, so how does this Mishnah work? B'hachi kamar. So now let's read the Mishnah according to Rabbi Elazar, because in a minute we're going to read the Mishnah according to Rabbi Meir. This is a good, and we're going to see this later in the sugya where we're going to read the same source, but through different, let's say, different glasses, right? Rabbi Elazar's glasses and Rabbi Meir's glasses. So Rabbi Elazar is saying, it's going to read the Mishnah like this. Ein kotvim tofes. You can't write the form when it's attached. Shema yichtov torah. We need, because the Mishnah started off, and this is also very important to notice, when you can't do something, but if you do it, it's okay. So you have to have what's the ideal. And then, well, if it didn't happen, it's still okay because the ideal was really only just in case. Okay, so let's figure out what just in case was. Really, the tofes can be written if it's attached to the ground, but don't do it because if we let you write the tofes when it's attached, you might actually end up writing the toref as well. And the toref is that unique part that can't be written in that way, can't be attached. Then, right, katvu l'tofes, if you did v'talshu, and then katvu l'torach v'natznu l'kasher. Even if you accidentally wrote the tofes, but you remember before you wrote the unique parts for the man and the woman, and then you wrote that while it was detached, it's fine. Now, notice Rabbi Elazar has no mention here of witnesses signing on a get at all. It's almost like he doesn't require it. Okay? That's Rabbi Elazar. Rish Lakish Amal, Chatmu Shaninu. Rish Lakish says, what are you talking about? Let's go back to the words of the Mishnah. Again, Ein kotvim b'mechubar lakarka. You can't write on something attached to the ground. Katvu b'mechubar. Talshu v'chatmu v'natznu l'kasher. Notice what word appears here. And then they signed it. Now, the way we just explained the Mishnah, according to Rabbi Elazar, it was the writing that was done after it was detached. It was the writing of the toref, not the tofes, right? But it was the writing. But it comes to Rish Lakish and says, what are you talking about? It says chatmu, and they sign. So he says this Mishnah is clearly not Rabbi Elazar, but it must be Rabbi Meir. Ta'amar ede chatima karte. Okay, ede chatima karte, according to Rabbi Meir, he says it's not, you don't need the witnesses that have watched the get being passed from the man to the woman or the messenger to the woman. No, it's the witnesses that sign the document that are critical. Okay, when we say ede chatima karte or ede masira karte, what we mean is what is essential. What is the essential? Which witnesses are key to make this get a good divorce? Okay, so that's why we use this word karte. This is what separates them. It's the witnesses' signatures on the document that separate them. Because why? Because the get has to be a get, and it's a document, and a document needs signatures for it to be a valid document. V'hachi kamar. So the way he reads the Mishnah is, en kotvim k'toref, gzera shema yachtom. You can't write even the toref. You can't write any part of the get attached to the ground. Why? Because if we let you write anything when it's attached to the ground, we're worried about what? Again, it always has to be the first stage is you can't do it only because we're worried about something, because in the end, if you do, it's okay. So why would it be okay? Because it's only a gzera, maybe you'll sign. But katvu letoref, talshu, chatmu v'natnu la kasher. Okay, so that means that if you signed the get while it was attached to the ground, no way is it ever going to work, right? According to Rabbi Elazar, if you wrote the toref when it's attached to the ground, no way is it going to work. Each one thinks, right, that the issue is something else. But again, the details are a little bit less important. If you didn't follow everything, it's not so critical. The main thing to understand here, and this is a machloket that appears multiple times in Masechet Gitin, and particularly in our sugya that we're going to see on Daf Lamed Vav, which is Rabbi Elazar thinks the key witnesses, Eidei Mesira Karte, the key witnesses are the ones who witness the event happening, and then they become like Eidei Kiddushin, which basically means they are witnesses to basically make the action actionable, right? Without that, it's not a get. According to Rabbi Meir, it's the signatures on the document. And basically, the get is just, why do you need signatures on a document? We all know. Because otherwise, the document, it could be, somebody just put it together and it wasn't really a real document. You need signatures to make the document valid. Okay, that's the background to today's class. So now, before we finish, okay, you can fill this in yourself. It's pretty easy, right? What Rabbi Elazar says, which witnesses are critical, right? He's going to say the ones who witnessed the event happening. According to Rabbi Meir, it's going to be the ones who sign on the get. The problem is that the Mishnah in the 4th chapter says something which gets a little bit tricky. And I'm going to read this Mishnah, go through it, and then I'm going to send you to Chavruta. So the Mishnah here gives a case first about an almanah. It's going to give 3 cases of takanot. Again, we're in this Mishnah of takanot. The last one I'll already skip to the end is Hillel et Kim Pruzbal Mipnei Tikun Olam, which we already learned, and I think it was the 2nd class. We have this case I'm not going to go into, which is a widow. When she wants to get the money for her ketubah from the yatomim, from the husband's, when the husband dies, she gets her ketubah money. But who does she get it from? The people who inherited. Well, she can only do it with a shvuah. She has to swear that she got the money, that she didn't take any money during her lifetime. Anyone who collects money from orphans needs to basically take an oath and say, I swear I never got paid during my lifetime. The father never paid them, because how do they know, right? If you come to me and you say, you owe me money, and I say I paid you back already, you know whether I paid you back or not, right? But in the case of orphans, they have no idea if their father paid back. So people always have to swear to them. The problem was that there was this issue that women were falsely swearing, and I'm not going to get into why, but therefore, nimnu'u milahashpi'ah, they said women can't swear because they weren't trustworthy because of a reason of the way ketubah. I don't want to get into the whole thing. It's not that women aren't trustworthy. It was a unique situation because of that. Anyway, because of that, they had no way to get their money from the ketubah. So Rabban Gamliel said, this can't work. I mean, the women have to collect their ketubah money. Otherwise, you're basically not allowing them to have it. So he makes this takana, since they weren't trusted about a shvuah, he allowed them to take a vow, and that worked. And we're not going to get into the details. That's a whole separate case. The second takana here is Ha'idim chotmim ala get mipnei tikun ha'olam, which is witnesses sign on the get because of Tikun Olam. Now, why is this a huge problem? The main problem is that what? We just said that by Torah law, right, we have a debate between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Meir. What's the main thing that makes the get happen? So Rabbi Elazar says it's the witnesses that witness the get happening, right? And the main thing really by Torah law is to write. Okay, that actually works okay. And then Ha'edim chotmim mipnei Tikun Olam. We don't yet know why Tikun Olam. You're going to have to learn that. But the main thing is that kind of fits at least, okay? Because by Torah law, you had to watch the witnesses pass it out. The witnesses had to testify that they saw something happening. And we made this Tikun Olam to have Eidim Sam in the get. But what about Rabbi Meir? If Rabbi Meir says the Torah law of vikatav, where it says to write it in the Torah, really means katav and chatam, and you have to sign, then what's going on here about this Tikun Olam? What do you mean? That's Torah law. It's not Tikun Olam. That's the Torah law. Tikun Olam, we already know this. We've learned already 3 weeks of Tikun Olam. It's where the rabbis come and say something's not working properly and we need to make a change. So the question is this Mishnah clearly Rabbi Elazar, or can it also be explained according to Rabbi Meir? So now I'm going to send you to Chavrutot. Okay, we're going to go for, actually, we'll do 40 minutes, okay? So the intro went a little bit long. We'll have 40 minutes of Chavruta, okay? And as usual, like I did last week, we basically have the Gemara sources, going through the Gemara with Rashi, and then with punctuation and all that. What I want you to do if you have time, only if you have time at the end, there's extra sources. They're not translated into English. It's a little bit complicated to translate those kind of sources, but I'm not expecting most people to get to those later sources. They're actually, this week, they're super complicated. So if you do get to them, you might not get through them. They're really, really complicated. The main thing is I want to go through it with you in the class. So the extra sources are really extra. They're not really meant so much for the class. Only if you get to them and if your text skills are good enough to be able to get through it, go for it. Otherwise, don't worry about them at all. We're going to do them together. I really just wanted them on the sheet so that we could go over them together at the end of class.